You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Everyone, and welcome to Fika. This week, Morgan Daimler is making a return visit. She is an author, both fictional and non-fictional, a witch, a teacher, and a fairy expert. We'll be discussing her freshest release, Freya, Meeting the Norse Goddess of Magic, and Between the Worlds, a fictional series. Morgan always has a lot to share with us, and what she shares is real. Whether it's her personal experiences with spirits or deities, or the emotions of a fictional character, we can feel the truth behind them. She cuts right to the point, which I should have just done. She cuts right to the point. And though you're never quite sure what you're going to see next, you know it's something that's going to make you think, whoa, I didn't see that coming. But yeah, I get it. And I'm going to take that one step further, if I may. So thank you for taking us one step further in our thinking and our understanding, Morgan, and welcome back to Fika.
Yeah, thank you for having me back on. I'm excited to be here.
Ben has written, "It's Morgan Daimler throws flowers." What does that mean? Ben, what does that mean?
Hi, Ben.
Morgan, he's throwing flowers towards you. Okay, I read it wrong. It's Morgan Daimler. Ben throwing flowers.
He can throw flowers at me if he wants. It's fine.
Yeah, no, it's very good. I just see, this is what happens when you use a different expression when reading something, right? It has a whole different meaning. How are you, Morgan?
I'm hanging in. It has been a very hectic summer, but I'm managing so far.
You are, and you're doing well. And thank you for clarifying that, Ben, and for your sarcasm this afternoon. Okay, Ben Simpson, author, says hello, and it means hello. Okay, so we're going to forget about you for a minute, Ben. He's being disruptive, Morgan. Oh, no. And we'll get on with our... That's him, right?
Yeah. I mean, his book is really good, so he can be disruptive if he wants.
It is. His book is constructive. I will never have any complaints or criticism of his book. Or of Ben either. We're just joking around, guys, just joking around. Okay, so I wanted to clarify something for myself, and whether the audience wants it clarified or not.
Sure.
So Freya, we've talked to other authors who have written Pagan Portal books as well. You have written several. The last one, 21st Century Fairy, we discussed, was a Pagan Portal. So within the Norse beliefs, you have also written Odin and Thor.
Yes.
But you've also written the Norse Pantheon book, and I know that Moon Books has other Pantheon books, and so what is the difference? I disappeared. What is the difference between the Portal books and the Pantheon books?
Sure. So they're both meant to be introductory in different ways. I love the Pagan Portal series, which is why I've written so many books for it, because I just think it's a marvelous idea. Yeah, it's the idea is to have a book that's about 100 pages or so. So the price point is going to be lower because books are getting quite expensive.
Crazy, yeah.
But that offers like a very solid basic introduction to a topic and gives people enough of an understanding of it to decide if they want to learn more, or at least feel like they're pretty grounded in understanding it, which I love. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. The Pantheon series, the books are a little bit longer. They're not quite twice as long as the Pagan Portals, but close. And it's supposed to be a little more all-encompassing. So it gets into more depth with different things. It gets into a little bit of the history. It gets into different aspects of historic belief, modern belief, just digs a little deeper because you have more room to write. Of course, it is then a higher price point. So, it's a
But it's what's happening, and it's not the authors. I don't want to. It's what happened. The authors have no control over type of thing. So,
no, it's a supply issue as far as I understand it, with the cost of papers going up, the cost of productions going up, shipping is going up, and that all ends up raising the price of the books.
Right. And the firefighters aren't going to help the firefighters are helping, but the fires themselves are not going to be helping the situation. So this is what I like about the pagan portals, because it gives you so many references to move on and study yourself. And I think, yes, I will. I haven't read any of the Pantheon books yet. So.
It's okay. There's only a few out. There's the Norse one. I believe there's an Egyptian one. And I believe there's one other, although to be honest, I'm not going to remember offhand what it is. But there's several more in the works. It's meant to be a whole series eventually. I'm working on one for the Irish Pantheon as well.
Very cool.
For a few years.
Very cool. And I think there's a Greek one coming up.
Yes.
With that I've discussed with others. So Freya is very cool. I'm liking her. I'm like, I hadn't really looked into her before, and so, like, as herself alone, and so I was just blown away by her characteristics. But what drew you? You talk about your personal experiences in this book. What drew you to Freya, Morgan?
So this is another of the stories where I get to make myself sound really old. So back in 1999, 2000, I had a small group of local friends, and one of them, my friend Patty LaFile, was particularly devoted to or connected to Freya. And sort of what got me interested in Freya and studying her stories and getting to know her and her mythology and folklore and all of that was really seeing Patty and how she was not just sort of living her life kind of in tune with that, but also just how passionate she was about Freya, and kind of watching what she was doing and listening to the stories that she was talking about. And Freya is just one of those goddesses that I think once you start to kind of learn about her, you want to know more. She kind of pulls you in.
Yeah, no, I'm pulled in. Okay. I'm pulled in all the way. Like, she's just so, like, she has so much agency over herself.
She does.
And her actions, and she doesn't listen to what anybody says or what they're thinking about her. And I'm just like, okay, I need this goddess in my life. Thank you very much. I tend to go for such goddesses, like put on the boots and let's get some work done. And I think she is one of those goddesses. So what specifically are some of the things we can say about her without spoiling the entire book? Characteristics.
I mean, I think that, when we're talking about Freya, because she is fairly popular. Most people, if you mention the name Freya, even if they don't know a lot about Norse mythology, they're going to recognize the name.
The name is known.
Yeah, she's probably, I would say, the most well-known of the Norse goddesses. And I think what makes her particularly interesting is that people recognize her, they recognize her name, but a lot of people really don't know much about her. There's this sort of surface understanding that a lot of people have. So when you dig into her mythology and her stories and her associations and all of this, there's just so much to it. Like, it was hard to keep it to a pagan portal. I could have written a lot more about Freya because there's just so much to her. And I think that there's certain things that on the surface we hear about her Like you'll hear people talk about she's a goddess of love. And that's one of those things that it's true, but it's not true. It is true, but in a very specific kind of way that you have to sort of appreciate her stories and what she was actually connected to understand. She's not like a Valentine's Day goddess.
No, not at all. Are there any Norse Valentine's Day gods or goddesses?
One of Freya's handmaidens, I think, is more associated with maybe what we would consider that sort of like romantic partnership kind of energy. Freya, in my opinion, at least, and from how I take her stories, is a little more on the passionate end of love. She was paid to for it, which I think a lot of people don't realize, but definitely not the merit.
No, well, from what you wrote, I saw her as a life goddess, and love being part of life, and the side effects of love. So, or just
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
The side effects.
Yeah.
So she's there for birth. She's there for death. She's there for war. She just sort of gets. I just see her get down to business, goddess, as we maybe a little less emotional and don't even go there kind of attitude.
Yeah, I think that's another thing a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate about her, is that she does have this sort of all-encompassing energy to her. She kind of, like you were saying, she sort of has these different aspects, I guess we could say, that can apply sort of throughout your whole life in all sorts of different situations. And I'm not a huge fan of the idea of like deities of specific things. I think that tends to be too narrow of a way to understand them. But it is true that a lot of them are associated strongly with, this particular thing or that particular thing. And with Freya, it's sort of everywhere. She's kind of a little bit of everything in a really, really good way.
Yes, I think so. And I want to point out that I am not expressing what I think Freya is because I'm saying, oh, I knew all this. This is all stuff I got from Morgan's book. So I'm demonstrating how knowledgeable, even with 100 pages, not that I'm knowledgeable. Okay, I'm not good, but just how much knowledge you can gain from reading this, the pagan portals to send you in a direction of where you want to go. And they really make you think. And Morgan particularly does a good job of that.
Thank you. I think with Freya, it was probably one of my favorite pagan portals to have written, to be honest, because...
Are you allowed to do that? No.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to officially have a favorite, but
she does.
Just because I learned so much when I was writing it, because there were certain things that, like I said, are kind of just widely known or widely accepted about Freya, that when I really dug into them, just turned out to be so much more layered and nuanced. And there were actually certain things that I had always kind of assumed maybe weren't true about Freya, or were like modern revisions about her character, that when I actually dug into it, it's like, no, there's all this history to it, and there's all these like social contexts that would have been going on at the time that sort of explain why things that we might sort of be a little squeamish about maybe, or not want to look into closely, are actually kind of important to understanding her. So it was
and the time that she developed into a goddess. Ben has an actual question. Was there anything you learned in writing this book that you didn't know before?
I definitely learned a lot writing this book, which I have to admit was a little bit surprising, because, as you mentioned, I've got Pagan Portals Odin, I've got Pagan Portals Thor, I have the Norse Pantheon book. So this is not my first time writing about this sort of more general topic. And I've been kind of active in the US heathen community since 2006. So, and it's not a subject that I like was new to, but there were a lot of things about Freya that I didn't realize there was so much nuance to. And I'm trying to think of a specific example to give. And of course, my mind goes completely blank when I try to find specific examples on the fly. But I think maybe, like, for example, the connection she has with fertility, particularly agricultural fertility, that was something I really hadn't understood or been aware of until I was writing this book and really digging into the sources. And it clarified for me. So there's a saying in a couple different Norse myths. I shouldn't even say a saying. There's something that happens in a couple different Norse myths where the giants or a giant kind of confront the gods or have the gods in a bad position or have stolen something from the gods, like Thor's hammer. And what they want is the sun, the moon, and Freya. And the sun and the moon are kind of self-explanatory. You know, why wouldn't you want the sun and the moon if you can make demands of the gods? But why specifically Freya? Out of, you know, all of the goddesses they could have wanted, you know, you've got Iduna right there, who has the golden apples of immortality and all that fun stuff, but they wanted Freya. And I think I had always just sort of accepted that without really contemplating why. But when I learned about how connected she was to sort of this agricultural abundance and this idea of fertility of, you know, people and animals and the land and everything, it makes so much more sense now when I read that passage. Like, oh, of course they would want her because she's kind of the key to everything being fruitful.
Yes. No, she's really an all-purpose goddess. I'm just if we're going to give her a brand or a, you know, that line that gets people into Freya, she's all purpose. I love her. Brian would like to know, Morgan, how would you compare the characteristics of Freya with other major goddesses, for example, Hera?
I mean, I definitely think we can always find some points of comparison and crossover when we take someone like Freya and then compare her to anyone, whether it's Hera or the Morgan even, or anyone. And I think some of that is because of what we were just discussing, that she's got this all-encompassing kind of thing going on. I do think if we look at specifically like Hera, that Hera would be more comparable maybe to Frigga, who is Odin's wife in the mythology and sort of the, I guess you'd say, queen of the Aesir, queen of the Norse gods. Freya is a little more feral than that. You know, she's not the sort of goddess in the stories who sits on a throne and looks down and sees the fate of the world, which is something that Frigga does. She's a lot more hands-on too. Not that Frigga doesn't have her moments, but Freya seems to be much more
You're much hands-on.
Yeah, much more interactive with the human world.
Yes. With all the hands. So I think if we want to bring out her practicality and who she is, can I just tell one little story, sort of PG version, very short, Morgan? So just go ahead. Okay, so Freya wanted this necklace that was made by 4 dwarves. So she suggested a way in which they could have a good time all together, and she would have the necklace at the end of that. So they had the good time, and she has the necklace. Now, many people over years and centuries, maybe not quite understanding the times and the contexts and the way things have sort of had negative connotations towards that and come up with a few names or whatever. I say this demonstrates a woman, a goddess, who knows what she wants, knows what she has, and uses it to get what she wants. So good for you, Freya. And this is the kind of goddess we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's a really good example of something that researching it made me rethink how I was approaching it. Because it is one of those things, it's a little controversial. Some people don't like to talk about that particular story with Freya, or they do tend to take that very sort of, I guess, goddess shaming approach to it.
That's probably a dangerous hobby. I'm not shaming any goddesses.
Yeah. But when I kind of started digging into it, I realized that a lot of the popular versions of the story that get sort of passed around are from the Victorian era. And the Victorian era, those stories of any culture are really an issue to kind of take too much at face value.
We're just going
to... because a lot of times those authors were very quick.
We're just going to wait on Morgan for...
Oh, did I freeze? Well, now you're frozen. Everything's frozen. I could keep talking. I don't know if anyone can hear me, or if I'm frozen, or if you're frozen. So, awesome. Just let me know, Vicky, when I'm back. Okay. I'm here and rambling to myself, apparently. And
well, we're...
That's okay. I'll just keep talking.
Okay. All right. So we missed everything you said up to I'll just keep talking.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So I'm the one that's frozen. Okay. Why am I frozen?
That's okay. I'll talk for a little bit and we'll try to get it figured out. But basically, the Victorian writers are very quick to insert their own sort of morality. And part of that meant that they were very judgmental of Freya's actions. So, you know, when we're looking at this story of her making this deal with the 4 dwarves, which involves spending a night with each of them, the Victorian authors did not relay that in a way that looked any sort of positive towards Freya. Whereas when we go back to the older sources that they were sort of pulling from, it was a much more neutral kind of story. There wasn't this judgment. It wasn't implied. Like there's one Victorian version, which is just really harsh towards Freya. Talks about how much shame she felt and all of this nonsense. The original version wasn't like that. It was just, there was this thing the dwarves had made. The dwarves, of course, are known for making these amazing magical items. That's where Thor got his hammer, courtesy of Loki. So when she saw this necklace and it was something she wanted, this was how she got it. And it really does kind of lean into who she is as a deity, this symbol of fertility and fruitfulness. And like you said, it's a great way to look at how she has all this agency and all this control. All of the other Norse gods, when they have these dwarven made treasures, they were all given to them, usually by Loki trying to fix a problem he caused. But with Freya, that's not the case. She went out and she acquired this herself, which is really striking if you stop and think about it, in contrast to like Thor and Odin and Frey, her brother, who just sort of passively were given these things.
So I'm going to trust I'm working now.
I can hear you. Okay. You seem fine now.
Okay. All right. So yes, she took what she had and she got what she needed. And I think instead of just sitting there saying this isn't fair, all these people get what they want and I have to work for it. And she did. And that is a great way of, yes, we talk about the context. Now, excuse me, that's the older context. What I love about 21st century fairy and this one is that you add lists of all the contemporary stuff that Freya is in, like whether it's a series on one of those streaming sites or even video games. You bring it up because you say it's important for us to interact with them on a more modern level.
Yes.
And can you tell us why that is? Why should we do that, Morgan?
Sure. I think, and to be clear, I'm not implying that all of those depictions in video games and TV shows and movies are perfect or even sometimes good. But I think that it's easy to fall into this mindset, even for people who are learning about these deities, or even people who are pagans or witches who are trying to engage with them now, of seeing the gods and the goddesses as historic, as, you know, rooted in the past. And I think it's really important to include these modern examples to really get people to grasp that, you know, they're still current. You know, there are still new stories being told of Freya. Again, whether those stories are good or bad is a separate conversation. But, you know, she's still very present in the world. She's still very present in people's minds. And I think we need to be aware of that in order to really understand how important she is.
Because stories change. They change with the people's needs. And therefore, she would be available for the needs now. And to make herself known in ways that are more available to us. In that same idea of this is the way it was, this is the way it's always going to be, you discuss the difference between, well, say for example, I love the part where you say your daughter drew a picture of Freya and it came from the heart, from the soul of who she was, not what the world has, you know, other illustrators have shown us or whatever. That was from her heart. And you were going to pick up some crayons. Do you have the picture to show us?
No, I should have planned ahead.
I wasn't even leading that. So like, how cool. I should have asked her to draw a picture of Freya. But we're all going to have different interpretations. And that's how people, in the first place, there was no books on this is what Freya is. There was people getting to know her and creating their own understanding.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, you know, when we look at the older mythology and the older stories, a lot of times we don't get physical descriptions. You know, occasionally we will. But even then, it can be contradictory. Like Thor, we have some references of him as a redhead, some as a blonde. You know, so it's kind of up in the air. There is no decisive, like, this is how he appears in the mythology. It's a little fluid. And Freya's the same way. Like, we don't have a very clear physical description. I think part of that was because it was understood that people would sort of perceive her in their own ways. There wasn't like a standard stock image that was going around. And I think that helps people connect to her more because she feels more personal.
Well, first, I would like to point out that I see Marvel's depiction of Thor very favorably. Second of all, and next, I tried it. So I closed my eyes and said, you know, how do you see Freya? And amazingly, a complete different universe. I saw her as Wonder Woman's mother in the as the Amazon, and I thought, you know what? I see her as a little aged, not incapable or not, but a little. And then I looked and I think I'm putting on a little age to a lot of the gods and goddesses just because my story is getting older as well. So I relate to them, their knowledge, except maybe with Thor. I relate to their knowledge.
Yeah, we have a whole conversation just about the way that the Marvel movies have changed how people picture, because there's so much artwork out there now, devotional artwork of the gods, but that is really clearly based on, you know, the actors that played those deities, or, you know, just the Marvel depictions of them in the movies. And to me, it's really fascinating to see how that crossover has happened. And it just gets back into why we need to appreciate that these are still living stories. They're still out there. You know, we still want to engage with them, which is why we picture, you know, Tom Hiddleston or Chris Hemsworth when we're thinking of Norse gods.
But they were so perfectly cast. I mean, the act. Okay, so Ben, the spring break. A lot of queer Norse heathens resonate with the sexual aspect of the deities because of the Marvel depictions.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if this was where Ben was going with this, but I think the comic books in particular, because the comic books you had Thor becoming Lady Thor, and then back to Thor, and you have Loki all over the place, and we had the multiverse Loki TV show where you have an alternate Loki that was female. So I definitely agree that there's a lot of queer people out there who resonate particularly with some of those Marvel aspects and showing that fluidity. The Thor part, not so much in the mythology. We don't find the Loki for sure.
Loki's all over the place.
Yeah, Loki, for people who aren't familiar with the mythology, is the father of several children, but is also the mother of at least one.
So work that out, if you will.
I would like that's what he wants.
I would like to exactly. I would like to just take a minute here to vent about the Thor becoming a female. Okay. I have never ever had any problems with representation, because if I see characteristics in a character I like, I just take them on, whether they're male or female or whatever. And I thought, this is an easy thing to do. But then the Thor thing happened, and I started seeing like these people who hadn't talked about comic books in 100 years or whatever, going, well, she can't do it. A woman cannot be Thor. And so I was like, okay, I have to rethink this, because obviously it is issue. What is their problem?
Yeah.
And
what is their problem? That's a good
and maybe little girls do need to have okay, even before Marvel, to be fair, way back when the comics started or whatever, I was a Thor fan, with that really horrible cartoon with that theme song. Yes. Because
that makes me so happy.
Thor the god, yes, almighty, yes, because it was mythology, and it had always been. He was always my favorite I'm not a big superhero fan, but he was always my favorite superhero because he was a myth, and I was attracted to that. So I started thinking.
Has one of my favorite lines of all time, which is something happens and Thor is like, by Odin's beard, and Odin's right next to him and goes, by my beard.
Yes.
It just cracked me up.
Yes, no, I'm gonna have to put that up on Fika, the theme song and the whole bit. So now I'm
so bad, it's good.
So I'm thinking, I was a little girl who loved Thor, but had a strange way of thinking, obviously, because I'm just like, I can be Thor. And so I was rethinking of that, and I was thinking, maybe there's little girls that need to see Thor as a little girl. And I do not have comic books, but I have the first 5 of the Thor female series. Yeah, just because I was going to frame it, because I was just like, how dare you first complicate my life? I had it all sorted out in my head. And second of all, just why? Why is this a big deal? I just don't understand why it would be a fuss. It's a story. Stories change. Well, I understand why it would be a fuss, but it's not a fuss to me.
Anyone who thinks that that's really strange does not read comic books, because comic books and the way that they retcon things and have these storylines and then go back to the other storylines, and if you're a fan of comics, the amount of alternate universe, different things that happen in comics is really all over the place. So the Lady Thor arc was not even that strange or unusual by comic book standards, and I actually think it was really good to challenge people who have a super rigid idea of who or what a deity can be. If it's a deity to me, then it can be what it wants to be, and it can take on whatever form it wants. It can do what it wants. It can, I'm not going to put a limit on a god based on what I assume about human physicality, which we could also get in a whole conversation.
Well, yeah, whether or not they have or they're just a appearing as we want them to appear, and just to prove the point that is it okay? Here is my husband saying, speaking of comic book, is the only comic books you own are the Thor became a woman comic books, because I needed those. And Brian brings up a good point, which happens so Brian brings up a good point. The comic book Lady Thor arc was great. It brought up so many philosophical issues, not least of which is, what does it mean to be worthy? What does it mean to be worthy? And that is something that affects everybody. So good point, Brian. And so so going back to Freya, but I do stand by the fact that this was an important little side note, because it talks about how we feel about how people feel about
I think it's good
appearances.
To challenge our preconceived notions. Something very similar happened, but with a much, well, actually no, probably equally dark reaction. When the Marvel movies first came out and Idris Elba was cast as Heimdall, the amount of ridiculous drama that started in a lot of heathen groups, because people did not like that depiction of that deity, which comes down to skin color, which is ridiculous. Because again, the gods are going to appear however they choose to appear, and also Idris Elba is amazing. So, but it's I think it's good sometimes for us to have those preconceived notions challenged, and to really stop and think about, why do we feel like a deity, whether it's a comic book version or a Norse pagan version, has to be depicted in one very specific way? Why are we uncomfortable with that being flexible, especially in the modern world where, why should it appear with whatever motorcycles and I don't know, anything?
Because physical to some people is so much more important than imagination and spiritual. And Ben says, how dare they? And yes, you are correct, Ben. Now, moving that sort of brings up another touchy subject with the heathenry. And you brought it up in the book. And I'm very glad that you did, because if it's not brought up, it's going to bring an unfavorable opinion of all heathens and the Norse mythology. So when we speak about them arguing because of skin color, why is that, Morgan? Why would they do that?
So heathenry, Ausatru, Norse paganism, whatever we want to call it in whatever context, has struggled for a long time, a long time at this point, with issues relating to racism and white supremacy and a lot of things along those lines. It's very common for runes, for example, to be co-opted by these groups, for Odin in particular to get co-opted by these groups. And again, keeping in mind as I say this, I've been part of the heathen community now for whatever it works out to, 17, 18 years. And when I first had gotten into it, there was definitely an idea that you shouldn't tolerate these sorts of things in most of the groups. But there was also a little bit of a live and let live, just let them do their own thing as long as we're not part of it.
That if you ignore them, they'll go away.
Yes. Thing. And very predictably, that is not what happened. When you ignore or when you tolerate these sorts of things, it just tends to encourage them. And I think we've been at a place really in the last 10 years, but especially the last 5, where we have an obligation, in my opinion, to speak up and speak out against some of these philosophies and these ideas and the way that they're infiltrating. It really makes me sad that several religious symbols for Norse pagans, for heathens, are on the list of hate symbols, because it's really gotten to that point, and we could have stopped it much sooner if we hadn't had this attitude of, that's not our business. So we don't encourage it. We don't endorse it, but you're just going to let them do what they're going to do. And I think we really should have been vocally speaking out against this much earlier. So now we have to do it now, really.
Really. So the public service announcement here is not everybody that is part of the heathen community believes this. This is a fringe element to it. Canadians have gotten in trouble for saying that before, but I'm going for it. So there is a fringe element to it. And if you see that, stop it. And it's so easy. Like I had mentioned to Morgan, in my early, more innocent days of social media, back when I would see like this beautiful caption with this Nordic scenery, and I would be like, oh, this seems like a nice site, and I would follow it. And then several days later, get me out.
Yeah.
And I would have to leave it. It's very easy to get sucked into something with that without knowing when you're learning or whatever.
Yeah,
so
and it is so pervasive that you do have to be careful, which is why in my books I include, things sort of cautioning people and just making them aware, like, this is definitely not all Norse pagans. This is not all heathens, not all Asatruar. There are a lot of good people in the religion.
It's just a lot of disenfranchised males who want to be Thor. Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing in the mythology or the folklore or the history that really support this idea.
No, it's sad people. So, and this is why I say Morgan is real, is because she does approach these subjects, which is I wasn't even thinking about it when I was reading the book, but when you went there, I was like, oh yes, this really did need to be discussed for an introductory book, because it is.
Sadly, it does.
It does. Okay, so we've discussed that. So going back to portrayals, Dave thinks that Wednesday in Neil Gaiman's American Gods, the film, is the perfect. So apparently he sees Odin as a shyster, and I think a lot of gods and they weren't set up to be perfect. They were set up to do what they want because they were gods and goddesses in the power.
Odin in the mythology was always a very means justify the ends kind of person. A lot of his stories are about him doing things that are not super ethical because the outcome is something that is necessary for him, because he's trying to stave off the end of the world, Ragnarok, with the gods. So, from his point of view, he's going to do what he has to do to delay that as much as possible. And I 100% agree that American Gods is very well cast. And I think the book and the series are another great example of that sort of rooting the gods in the modern world. How would they be if they were walking around in the world today?
Yeah, Neil Gaiman definitely has a wonderful way of reimagining that with my. Yes, love the man. Okay, his work, love the work.
You can love both. It's fine.
I can love both. It's good. So what? Okay, one more thing, and then we've got to move on because we want to talk about Between the Worlds. I want to talk about Between the Worlds. I'm so caught up in the love story. I don't know who I want to. How that's
going to spoil it for you.
So I only have 11 books in the series. Lots of reading there. So when we talk, okay, so we kind of covered that. You need a little bit of the academic look into it so you know where it originated and can get the regular story, but you need that personal experience and that. So it's that balancing when going into any of those things.
Yeah.
And I definitely, once again, any writers out there, suggest this book because pagan portals are, it's all in lists, all the details. You don't have to look much further than they are to get what you need for a fictional book.
Okay,
so we're going into
and tell me that they like the books because they're pagans or witches. They like the books because they're fiction authors that were looking for like research material. Like there's definitely a lot of reasons that you might find the book valuable.
Well, and that's it. Here at Fika, we say one person's folklore is another person's spirituality, and we respect it in all its forms. Because it is the story that is most important, that's going to help us or make us think. So we're moving on to Between the Worlds, ladies and gentlemen. That is a series that Morgan has written and published independently. I think it's sort of like a paranormal mystery romance urban series.
Yep, I kind of describe it as like paranormal or urban fantasy and paranormal romance kind of smushed together with a little alternate reality going on. Oh, I think Vicky froze again. Are you back?
Keep talking.
Yeah, when I initially was going to write it, I hadn't written fiction in a long time, and a friend of mine had suggested I try it. This would have been back in 2013, I think, or 2014. And what they had suggested was that I should write something that I wanted to read. And so I figured, you know what? I'll give it a try. You know, why not? And initially, when I was writing the first book, Murder Between the Worlds, I really was just writing a story I would want to read. I didn't think I was going to publish it. I wasn't worried about other people seeing it. I was really just doing it sort of for fun in a way, although it is a very kind of heavy book for those of you who are considering reading it. The premise is that in 1914, the human world and the world of fairy were merged together involuntarily, as it were. And it resulted in this kind of patchwork quilt world where, you know, parts of it are still the human world, parts of it are the world of fairy, which is run by the elves, and parts of it are kind of these border areas between those two sections, those two patches. And in a place, in a town that exists kind of on the edge between those two worlds, there's a serial killer who's going around. And the main character kind of gets pulled in as someone who is a bit of an expert because of her background and having a bookstore in what they think might be the purpose of the serial killer. It's sort of these ritual killings. And so obviously the first book is going to deal with a serial killer, which is not super light reading for everyone.
Well, it isn't, but it's real. Okay, you're doing a mystery. You're doing how these people will react to any. Like we just talked about with Freya, how people react to changes in their life, and this is an alternate reality in which there was a big change in their life, and they've never gotten over with it. So you can't really write a book like that without getting a little, you know, deep.
Yeah. Well, and part of what I want to do with my fiction is take on some really popular tropes. So I like to take things that are very common in other urban fantasy or paranormal romance or what have you, but then twist them, you know, do them a little differently. And one of the things I do with Between the Worlds is I do try to look at, you know, how would this actually impact someone who kind of gets sucked into this investigation, but really doesn't have that background. You know, she's not a police officer. She's not a detective. She literally is a bookstore owner.
Yeah, well, because bookstore owners, we readers, are experts at a lot of things.
Yes. That's sort of where she's coming from. She's read a lot, but she doesn't have a lot of practical real world experience.
No.
With certain things.
Well, no. And that's always helpful to do. But it does, I don't know, I'm caught up in the characters. Your characters are always very interesting. I'm caught up in your taking on these tropes, but because they are real characters. They are no, not that I'm saying the fiction is. I know you people think that I believe this stuff is always going on somewhere outside of Morgan's mind, but
at this point, I feel like I'm just like taking notes and repeating the stuff the characters get into. I'm not even sure how much of it I'm coming up with anymore.
That's someone has to be in control. Morgan, you can be the goddess Freya over this world. Okay, you can be
the number of times, and this is true, the number of times I've had a plot planned out and outlined and been like, this is what's going to happen, this is the arc, and I get like partway through and the characters are just like, I would never do that. That is not what I would do. And I'm like, oh darn it, it's not. And then you have to go in a whole different direction because otherwise the story doesn't make sense because that's not what that person would do.
Well, and obviously you do well listening to them because I do find that they follow through, like with who they are and how they might be in this situation. And there's no perfection. The characters are real. They're like real people that you see on the street, and they trust people they shouldn't trust, and they don't trust people. And I don't even know who to trust. All I know is I usually have a definite idea if there is like, or even if there should be a romance. I don't know, just dump them all. But I am wrapped up in this. Like, I'm like, I don't know what is the answer. One could help understand the past and who she is. The other she has history with. Like, but then if this happens, maybe he can help too. And Morgan, I'm just all caught up about it. So we'll move to Brian, who's usually a little more logical and less emotional. Brian asks, Morgan, I see you've both self-published and gone through small presses. How would you characterize the difference between the two publishing paths? Sorry if this is a bit off topic.
No, that's a great question.
Ask away.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think really for me, there's advantages and disadvantages no matter what you do. So if you go through traditional publishing, of course, the immediate challenge is getting a publisher who is going to take your work and publish it. If we can get past that part, there are advantages. The book will be more widespread. It gets out into a lot more places. People do tend to take a book more seriously still, whether they should or not. If it's coming from a traditional press, you get a lot more support. You get editing. The covers are more professionally done. I'm saying this as someone who does not have the money to put into.
No, it's cheaper to get a publisher, right?
Yeah. When you do self-publishing, it is going to be an investment, even if you're on a minimal budget. But I am not one of those self-published authors who has, 4 or 5 digits of budget to spend on really professionally putting the book out there. I'm a very do-it-myself kind of person because my budget is minimal, like two digits.
No, we're all listening, Morgan. We all understand.
I think the advantage with self-publishing, though, is that you have complete control. So, for example, when I was on the show last time, we were talking about my novel Into Shadow, which has just come out. It's gotten great reviews. The people who read it have really loved it, but it's very hard in the mainstream fiction market or the fantasy market. And the book is just not selling really well. I mean, it is selling, but not where you would want it to be. So I had planned to do a sequel. I don't know that I'm actually going to be able to do the sequel because traditional publishers are not going to invest in the second book in a series if the first book is not making it look worthwhile, because the second book will always sell less than the first book.
So you're not going to?
I'm going to write it. I just am not sure how they're going to feel about it.
Okay. So it's happening. It just may not go to.
Yeah. And the way contracts tend to work in traditional publishing is you can't just write a book for them, and then if it doesn't do exceptionally well and they're not keen on a sequel, you can't just publish it yourself. Like you have to wait a certain amount of time, or you have to buy your copyright back, or there's certain things that have to happen.
Can you just write it and send me a copy? Like
I can.
Just have a whole mail list of people who want to read it.
I'm writing it now, and to be like, most of the people who have read it really want a sequel and really like the characters. It's just getting it out to the market to a point where it's going to sell enough to make a sequel worthwhile. So I'm saying that as an example because with Between the Worlds, I was offered a contract on the first book with a traditional publisher, but I chose not to take it. I chose to self-publish because I knew when I wrote the first book that I wanted to do at least a trilogy. I knew that serial killer arc was going to take about 3 books to really get into and wrap up because there's a lot of stuff going on.
And you went a little further because there are 11 books, people, and I don't know because I haven't gotten to the end of the 11th one. Is there more to come for that?
I'm going to be working on the next book. The last 2 that have come out was a novella and a prequel. The prequel is probably going to end up being its own series because people really love that character. I am working on the next one in the main series at this point. So yeah, there's still more story to tell. The characters are still very loud and opinionated. So there'll be more. But I knew when I wrote the first book, there was going to be at least 3. And I knew if I took that contract and the first book didn't sell well, I would not be able to get those other books out there. So I made a decision that I would self-publish it. And then no matter what happened, even if only 5 people bought it, I could still keep writing for as long as I felt there was a story there to tell, which I'm glad that I did. People really seem to like it. There's a little fan group for it on Facebook. And, there's a lot of people that really like the characters and really like how the story's gone over the course of all those books. But that was a case where self-publishing, I think, really was the better choice, was the better option.
So, and this is the perfect example that people don't quite get. And we're trying to change that and let them know that not everyone who independently publishes is doing it as the default setting. Okay, they have, for their various own reasons, decided to go independent, and I'm glad you did too, because I'm still looking for I still haven't found what I'm looking for here, which is the answer to what is going on with that. So I have to keep going. Brian says that his characters, when we're talking about characters taking on
personality. Oh, I see his comment. My characters have rap parties inside my head and don't invite me. That is very relatable. I also feel sometimes like that's what's going on. The characters have their own agendas and their own plans, and I'm just along for the ride at this point. I think especially now, 10 books in, 11 books in, the characters are definitely running the show.
And you're running this show, Morgan. I think I have to sign you up for those times I can't make it. Like, Morgan, come over, and because you did half the show anyways while I was off doing whatever I was doing.
Keeping it rolling.
Yeah, no, just keep that. Just get this even more now. She's earned her keep here. Okay, so. Get this series. Try the series if you're into the paranormal thing. If you're into real characters, and I went again. Keep getting this. Keep getting the books. I'm going to keep getting them. Start with your first one. They're the ebooks are very reasonably priced. They really are.
I try, and I do. I know there's people that are on limited budgets. I do tend to run sales on Amazon where I can only do them like once every 3 months, but where I'll, the price is $2.99. I think for the ebook, I'll knock it down to like 99 cents for people. So if you want to read the series, but budgeting is an issue, just keep an eye on it. And it does periodically, at least the first 3 do periodically go on sale. So you can check them out then. If that's a better option for you. And the newest one should be coming out, assuming everything goes well, and my summer chaos is behind me now. The newest book should be coming out hopefully early next year. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
So looking forward to that. I would also like to point out to the fairies that we do know that they're here. Whenever I try to do a conversation with Morgan or anyone on that subject, everything seems to go the way they want it to. So I didn't pay attention to them. I also, when I was on vacation last week, saw a sign that said,
Oh, and we're frozen again, so we'll never know what the sign said.
I made my family drive. So it says Fairy Falls. So I made my family drive back half an hour to go down Fairy Falls, because you would think if the road is called Fairy Falls, there would be a Fairy Falls on the road. Drove down the road, could not find the Fairy Falls. There was a small beaver dams trail at the end, but at that point I'm like, no, I'm not going to make you go any further. Yeah. Came back home to internet and found out that it was on the beaver dams thing. So the beaver dams trail. So I did not get to see Fairy Falls, and I'm paying for it. I'm sorry, Morgan, that you need
That's
to get
very on brand for the fairies. I just, not to sound super mean, I'm glad for once I'm not the one, because usually it's me with all the weird tech problems and freezing or buffering or something. So I'm sorry that you're dealing with it, Vicky, but it's, you know.
I hear you. I would much rather it was you. So you're And Brian says that I forgot to leave out a bowl of whiskey for the fairies and goddesses, and I really do need to up my offerings, people. Okay. So there was so much I had to talk about. Morgan is just gonna need to come back again. That's all there is to it. So anytime, Morgan. With you. And we do have fun, even though we have our interruptions. So you take care, and the best of luck with all of your writing and getting that. I'm not rushing you for the next, because I still have like 8 or so of the series to read. So
yeah.
Anyway, okay, we better just end this. All right, Morgan. So bye. We'll talk later. Okay.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay, I hope. I have no idea what's going on, but I hope you can hear me long enough for me to say goodbye. May your coffee be hot and your story sweet. Thanks for being patient and listening, everyone. And I had to go to the music, and okay, we'll see how it goes. Thanks. Bye-bye.